Firewall-cmd is the command line interface for firewalld. Every firewall change on your production server goes through this tool. Knowing it well means you can confidently open ports, close them, verify the state, and diagnose problems without guessing. The first distinction to understand: runtime changes versus permanent changes. Runtime changes take effect immediately but are lost when firewalld restarts or the server reboots. Permanent changes are written to configuration files and persist across restarts. To apply permanent changes to the current session, reload. Most of the time you want permanent changes for production configuration, add the rule with permanent, then run firewall-cmd reload to apply it. The most commonly used commands: firewall-cmd state, is firewalld running? Firewall-cmd list all, what's currently allowed? Firewall-cmd permanent add service equals HTTPS, allow HTTPS, permanent. Firewall-cmd reload, apply permanent rules to current session. Firewall-cmd permanent remove service equals HTTP, block HTTP. Firewall-cmd get active zones, which zones are active? Keep these 6 in your head. They cover 90% of what you'll do with firewalld. Before making any changes, understand the current state. These commands tell you exactly what's allowed. Firewall-cmd state, outputs running or not running. If not running, your firewall is inactive, all ports may be open or the rules aren't enforced. Run sudo system start firewall to start it. Firewall-cmd list all, the most useful inspection command. Shows everything for the default zone, which interfaces are active in this zone, which services are allowed, which specific ports are open, which rich rules are configured, masquerade settings. Firewall-cmd list services, shows only the services currently allowed. Cleaner output than list all when you just need to check services. Firewall-cmd list ports, shows explicitly added ports, as opposed to services. If you used add port equals 8080/TCP, it appears here. Firewall-cmd list rich rules, shows any rich rules, advanced rules that target specific sources or destinations. Firewall-cmd get active zones, shows which zones are active and which network interfaces are associated with them. Typically shows public with your network interface. Run list all before any change. Run it again after reload to confirm the change took effect. This inspection first habit prevents mistakes. Services are the cleanest way to manage firewall rules. Instead of specifying ports, you use human-readable service names that map to predefined port configurations. Adding a service permanently, for production sudo firewall-cmd permanent add service equals HTTPS. After this, run sudo firewall-cmd reload. Then verify, sudo firewall-cmd list services should include HTTPS. Adding a service at runtime only, for testing sudo firewall-cmd add service equals HTTPS. This takes effect immediately without a reload, but is lost after a restart. Useful when you want to temporarily test access without committing to a permanent rule. Removing a service, sudo firewall-cmd permanent remove service equals HTTP. Then reload. Useful when you want to close a port, for example, if you want to force all traffic to HTTPS by removing the HTTP service. Querying whether a service is allowed, sudo firewall-cmd query service equals HTTP. Returns yes or no, useful in scripts. The services available on your system, firewall-cmd get services. This lists all predefined service names. Common ones: SSH, HTTP, HTTPS, FTP, SMTP, NTP, PostgreSQL, MySQL, MongoDB, Redis. What if the service you need isn't in the list? Use ports instead, sudo firewall-cmd permanent add port equals 3000/TCP. Or create a custom service definition in /etc/firewall/services/. While service names are cleaner, sometimes you need to open a specific port that doesn't have a predefined service name. This is common for custom applications, development servers, or non-standard service ports. Add a port permanently, sudo firewall-cmd permanent add port equals 3000/TCP. Reload to apply, sudo firewall-cmd reload. Add multiple ports, sudo firewall-cmd permanent add port equals 3000-3010/TCP opens a range of ports 3000 through 3010. This is useful for multi-instance applications. Remove a port, sudo firewall-cmd permanent remove port equals 3000/TCP. Reload after. UDP ports for services like DNS, 53/UDP, NTP, 123/UDP sudo firewall-cmd permanent add port equals 53/UDP. View all open ports, sudo firewall-cmd list ports. An important security note: never open node.js application ports, 3000, 4000, etc., to the public internet in the cloud security group or in firewalld. These ports should only be accessible internally and Jinx on the same server connects to them via localhost, which doesn't go through firewall's public zone rules. The localhost, loopback, interface is always in the trusted zone. Opening port 3000 to the public would bypass Jinx entirely, exposing your Node.js app without SSL, rate limiting, or any of Jinx's protections. One of the most common firewall mistakes is forgetting that permanent and reload are separate steps. Let me make this crystal clear. When you run sudo firewall-cmd permanent add service equals https, the rule is saved to the configuration file at /etc/firewall/zones/public.xml. But it is not yet active in the running firewall. The running firewall is unchanged. When you run sudo firewall-cmd reload, firewall reads the configuration files and applies them to the running firewall. Now the rule is active. The confusion: people run permanent, test their application, it doesn't work because the rule isn't active yet, and think firewall is broken. The fix: always pair permanent with reload. Pattern 1 permanent, correct for production 1, sudo firewall-cmd permanent add service equals https 2, sudo firewall-cmd reload 3, sudo firewall-cmd list all verify pattern 2 runtime only, for testing 1, sudo firewall-cmd add service equals https no permanent 2. Test immediately 3. After testing, either add permanently or it disappears on restart pattern 3 permanent and immediate, apply both at once sudo firewall-cmd add service equals https applies now sudo firewall-cmd permanent add service equals https saves it never skip the verification step. After every firewall change, confirm with list all. Standard firewall services and ports control access by port number for all sources. Rich rules add source IP, destination, time, and logging capabilities. The rich rule syntax: firewall-cmd permanent add rich rule equals rule, family equals IPv4, IPv6, source address equals X, destination address equals Y, service name equals Z, port equals N, protocol equals TCP, UDP, accept, drop, reject, log, allow SSH only from a specific IP. Sudo firewall-cmd permanent add rich rule equals rule, family equals IPv4, source address equals 203.0.113.1, service name equals SSH accept, combined with removing general SSH access. Sudo firewall-cmd permanent remove service equals SSH after reload, only IP 203.0.113.1 can SSH in. Everyone else is rejected. This is a powerful security hardening measure. Block traffic from a specific IP. For banning attackers, sudo firewall-cmd permanent add rich rule equals rule, family equals IPv4, source address equals 1.2.3.4, drop, log, and accept. For monitoring without blocking, sudo firewall-cmd permanent add rich rule equals rule, family equals IPv4, service name equals https, log prefix equals https-level equals info, accept. This logs every https connection to the system log. Useful for traffic analysis. Reject versus drop. Reject sends an ICMP rejection, the client knows immediately their connection was refused. Drop silently discards the packet, the client times out. Drop is better for attackers, they learn nothing. Reject is better for legitimate clients, they get a clear error. Firewall stores permanent configuration in /etc/firewall/. Understanding this structure lets you backup, restore, and manage configuration as code. The main configuration file for your zone /etc/firewall/zones/public.xml. This XML file contains all permanent rules for the public zone and services, ports, and rich rules. View it, cat/etc/firewall/zones/public.xml. You'll see an XML structure with service and port entries. Backup your firewall configuration, sudo cp or /etc/firewall/firewall backup 20260608. This copies the entire firewall configuration directory with a date-stamped name. Restore from backup, sudo cp or /firewall backup 20240605/*etc/firewall/n and sudo firewall-cmd reload. For infrastructure as code, store your firewall zone XML files in your Git repository and deploy them with configuration management. This ensures your firewall configuration is reproducible across servers. Firewall-cmd runtime to permanent takes all current runtime rules and saves them as permanent. This is the reverse of reload. Useful if you've made runtime changes you want to keep. Check whether a rule is in the runtime config, the permanent config, or both. Firewall-cmd query service equals HTTP, runtime, firewall-cmd permanent query service equals HTTP, permanent. If one is yes and the other is no, you may have a configuration drift between what's running and what will survive a reboot. Let's put together the complete, correct firewall configuration for a Node.js web server behind Jinx. What should be open in the Cloud Security Group? Port 22 TCP from your IP only, SSH, or from 0.0.0.0 if you need flexible access, accepting the security trade-off. Port 80 TCP from 0.0.0.0/0, HTTP for all, needed for Let's Encrypt and HTTP to HTTPS redirect. Port 443 TCP from 0.0.0.0/0, HTTPS for all, your production site. What should not be open in the cloud security group? Port 3000, 4000, etc., Node.js application ports. Any database ports, 5432 for PostgreSQL, 27017 for MongoDB, 6379 for Redis, these should only be accessible from localhost. In firewalled on the server, sudo firewall-cmd permanent add service equals ssh sudo firewall-cmd permanent add service equals http sudo firewall-cmd permanent add service equals https sudo firewall-cmd reload. What you should not add to firewalled, port 3000 or any node.js port. Jinx accesses node.js via localhost, which uses the loopback interface, in the trusted zone. No firewall rule needed for local communication. Database ports should also not be in firewall's public zone. If you need to connect to a database from another server, add a rich rule that restricts access to that specific server's IP. A concise reference of the mistakes that caused the most confusion. Mistake 1, running permanent without reload. The rule is saved but not active. You test, it doesn't work, you think firewalled is broken. Fix, always reload after permanent changes. Mistake 2, running reload without permanent. Changes are applied now but lost on next restart. You think it works, the server reboots, port is blocked again. Fix, always use permanent for production rules. Mistake 3, opening node.js application ports, 3000, 4000, to the public internet. This bypasses Jinx entirely, no SSL, no rate limiting, no security headers. Fix, keep these ports closed. Jinx handles external traffic, node.js ports are only accessible internally via localhost. Mistake 4, running both of and firewalled simultaneously. They both manage eptables and conflict. Rules from one can interfere with the other. Fix, use one or the other. Disable and stop whichever you're not using. Mistake 5, forgetting to verify after changes. Firewall-cmd reload succeeds even with no rules to apply. Always verify with list all. Fix, every change reload verify. Mistake 6, removing SSH service without a backup access method. You lock yourself out. Fix, always have your Cloud Console open to the security group settings before removing SSH access, and test your alternative access method first. A practical scenario about the permanent and reload workflow. You run sudo firewall-cmd permanent add service equals HTTPS. You immediately test your HTTPS connection from a browser. It still doesn't work, still showing connection refused on port 443. You run firewall-cmd list services and HTTPS is not in the output. What did you forget? Option A, you need to use zone equals public with the command. While you can specify the zone explicitly, the default zone is public, so this wouldn't explain the issue. Option B, you forgot sudo, the command requires root. You did use sudo, so this isn't the issue. Option C, you forgot to run sudo firewall-cmd reload after adding the permanent rule. This is correct. Permanent saves the rule to the configuration file but doesn't apply it to the running firewall. The reload is what applies the saved rules to the active firewall state. Option D, HTTPS requires a separate command to activate it after adding it. There's no such activation step. Permanent followed by reload is sufficient. The answer is C. The permanent plus reload pattern is non-negotiable. Permanent without reload means the rule exists in config but isn't active. Reload without permanent means the rule is active but won't survive a restart. Pattern to memorize, add with permanent, apply with reload, verify with list all.